All right. I am now joined by Kenzo Shibata, teacher, union activist, host of Meet the Left and the Kenzo Shibata Show. How are you doing today, Kenzo?
Doing great. Thanks so much for having me on, Ben. Excited. I'm going to get canceled twice pretty quickly because the two people that I have on my show that get the most unhinged tweets about are you and Catherine Liu. And Catherine Liu is going to be on my show in a week, so I'm ready. I've got my tweet juice here. It's a pina colada Slurpee, and I'll take it.
Nice. Well, despite being the one of us right now who's not currently in the Midwest, I think I have a much more salt of the earth. It's a Bell's Oberon, but yeah. It's funny actually you mentioned Catherine because I don't know her that well. I don't interact with her that often, but I actually was just talking to her pretty recently because people were, some people, I should say, right? Like, the important thing is that the tweet we're about to talk about got more likes than it did comments or retweets. Mm-hmm. So according to the sacred laws of Twitter, I was correct, about my initial thought. But whatever. I mean, there were part of it was I think 2/3 of what I was saying was right. There was a third that was poorly thought out and, whatever. I'm sure it's the first and last time that I'll ever tweet something without thinking about it enough. But part of the issue was that it was about intros, at the beginning of DSA meetings and such, and whether or not it's actually functionally useful to have people go around and say their pronouns at the beginning. And my take is no, because granted, I know there are lots of people in the world with better memories than mine, but I don't remember anything that anybody says in the lightning round intro at the beginning of a meeting. I don't even think that you should I don't think you should do lightning rounds, not for names, not for pronouns, not for anything. And it's also something that lots of people have different sensibilities on for lots of reasons. There are trans people, especially non-binary or non-passing, for whom it's a helpful thing to do. And, they have reasons to like it. There are also, binary trans people who have good reasons not to like it. Cause it's the ContraPoints tweet from whenever it was, a year or two ago, where she was I can go to a sports bar in North Carolina and be missed and mammed all night with no problem. Mm-hmm. But then I go to a lefty meeting and everybody's going around, doing the pronouns, and it's her in a room full of cis people, and she can feel the entire room turning to look at her, when it's her turn, because she's the only person, who.
I think part of it too is with tweets, people need to okay, let's ground what you're talking about in actual material and look at meetings. Yeah. Chicago DSA, we pull really big meetings. If we went through every single person's pronoun, that would actually be longer than an actual meeting. If we have 100 people at a meeting, it's going to take up the entire time, but we have name tags where people can choose to put their pronouns.
Well, and that's the thing, because my conclusion, and granted, I don't think some people made it to the end of the 2-tweet thread, but in the second tweet of the 2-tweet thread, my conclusion was, look, I think it's dumb. Granted, I've never seen anybody doing 100-person meeting. That would just obviously be insane. But I've certainly, back when I was going to more of both of these, that I have time to now, I've certainly been to, adjunct union meetings or, particularly, I guess we didn't so much do that there, but DSA meetings where there'd be 30 people there, right? Mm-hmm. And you go around and do that at the beginning. And I don't know, man. I mean, maybe I'm just not being generous enough about how good some people's memories are, but I don't believe that anybody remembers, all 30 of anything, right?
And I also I'm not a big icebreaker guy either.
No, so, I'm extremely anti-icebreaker.
When we had labor meetings in Chicago that had 12 members, icebreakers were great because we could have a space where we're all really, I'm using the word space. I could have used the word place. But in our meeting, we'd have a way of like getting to know each other because it was more informal.
Yeah.
And then when our meetings got bigger and bigger and bigger, it didn't make sense to even do icebreakers. Like we're all there because we're workers who are being hurt by capitalism. Right. That's our commonality.
Yeah, well, and also like people have like even beyond the specific things that come up for the pronoun issue, like Sam Hasselby was pointed out in that interaction, like there are people who are, you know, trans but still struggling with it, or you know, just like, you know, not quite sure about their, you know, gender identity, for whom like putting them on the spot to like tell 30 strangers, you know, what their pronouns is like kind of a shitty thing to do, even if it's very well intentioned. But like even beyond that, right, even if it's just like, hi, I'm Kenzo, I'm from the such and such branch, whatever, like, you know, it's not I mean, I don't know. I mean, like some people like us love to hear ourselves talk, and other people are extremely like hate being asked to talk.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the reason why you're not supposed to clap at DSA meetings, because of the people with those social anxieties, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. And so it's kind of funny that a lot of people who are very in favor of the no clapping are also in favor of this. So it's like my big conclusion at the end of the two tweet thread was, look, obviously it's a shitty thing to do to misgender somebody, to use pronouns they don't want to do. You shouldn't do that. But since I'm really skeptical that this is going to be an effective way of doing that, if you're worried about that happening, a much more effective thing, what I was suggesting, my big radical suggestion, is what you just told me that Chicago DSA already does, which is to just give people name tags, and then if the spirit moves them to, they can, you know, write, you know, Kenzo, he, him, or whatever, right? Like half of like leftists do in their Twitter bios. And I'm a whole lot more likely to notice the words printed on somebody's name tag than I am to remember what they said 45 minutes ago.
And then when you're having a one-on-one with them, you can look down at the name tag where like the pronoun would be important, as opposed to like another face in the room.
Yeah, no, exactly. So anyway, all of that's just to say it's kind of funny that since I was, you know, talking to Catherine Liu about this, that, you know, that you brought that up. But
yeah, she's, you know, if you ever want to, she's a great guest. She is very clear in her arguments and will just say the thing, and it's really easy to like pick apart what she's saying, you know, fully understand her arguments, because she's not going to like, she doesn't mince her words. She doesn't use weasel language to like get people to like, kind of like you, like to like get people to like her. So like she does make a great guest, because you can have a conversation with her that is like grounded in the material.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I actually should totally have her on, either to talk about like the virtue hoarder stuff, or like she's a film professor, right? That's her day job of getting that. Yeah, so it's like I actually, the more I think about this, like, you know, like I don't know, I like doing episodes about movies. I should have her on sometimes to talk about movies.
She did an episode of This Is Revolution about horror films, and it was captivating. Her and Pascal had really good chemistry talking about horror films and like what it says about society beyond them.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, no, that'd be good. Actually, doing a horror movie episode pretty soon, like I think in 2 weeks or something. Although it might not be released after. It's like we're gonna do it initially as a Patreon episode, but gonna do one with Jason from This Is Revolution and Toure Reed about Get Out.
Nice.
So yeah, looking forward to that. But
I love Toure. He teaches at my alma mater, Illinois State.
Yeah,
he was actually a mentor of a friend of mine, so like I've known of him long before I started reading him.
Nice. Yeah, no, I really enjoy him. Like I mean, I think he's a really insightful and brilliant, you know, writer. But like also he's just as a guest, he's just fun to hang out with.
He's a metalhead too.
Yeah, yeah. I think I do that. That's I should get into that with him sometime. Do you know like what we're talking about? Like
he likes the guitar virtuoso stuff, like Cacophony, Steve Vai. He's a guitar player. Like when I had Adolf on my show, I'm like, so were you the type of parent that dealt with the noise, or were you always yelling at Toure? And he's like, kind of in the middle.
Yeah, fair enough. So we are going to watch Charlie Kirk and JD Vance in just a minute, but before we pivot to that, just because I thought it was funny and we should do it on air, when we were talking, on the backstage before we started, I mentioned to you that I was in New York last weekend. Time is a flat circle; it all blurs together. Last weekend, and I went to go see Goodfellas, the film forum, and you said, and you were talking about the experience of watching it back in the day.
Oh yeah, like I remember because I would sneak the radio in my room when I was little and listen to Howard Stern when he was syndicated. He would kind of go on and off in Chicago. So like I would get really excited when a station would pick him up and then another one would, then they'd drop him and then he'd be somewhere else. But he had Hank Hill on a lot. And all the callers would be like these mobster types, or at least people impersonating mobsters, just saying, "You're a dead man, Henry. If they ever see you for snitching, you're dead." And like he would be quivering on. He would start out very strong and like braggadocious, and then you'd hear it in his voice whittle away by the end of the interview. And it was just beautiful because people who didn't see that just saw this badass Ray Liotta on screen.
Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting. I remember just a little bit of that. Like I wasn't, I wasn't a regular, Stern listener, but I do have a vague memory of some of that. But yeah, I love that movie. I mean, I think it's a good. And I actually did read his book that it was based on, Wise Guys, and there's which has some fascinating stuff in it, like he talks about how when he was in prison, this is such a wonderful like random detail. Like first he was in like a real prison, and then he got transferred into this like nice country club prison. And part of how he worked it is that like the spots in the country club prison had just become available because of a hunger strike by some people there that like led the prison authorities to like get pissed off and transfer them to the real prison. And the main like leader of the hunger strikers was G. Gordon Liddy. So
really.
So Henry Hill was in the, was in like because which is like whatever, like G. Gordon Liddy, I guess, thought he should be in an even nicer prison, or I have no idea, but yeah, I think something the movie does capture, that also tracks the book, is just what like a utter sociopath this guy is, like, that like he there's this appendix where like the actual author, right? It's interviews, with him, like talks about, seeing him at these trials where, he would testify against guys who'd known his entire life and send them to prison for the rest of their lives. And then then he'd go back and he'd have pizza and he seemed like totally untroubled, by like what he'd just done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the one thing that comes to mind, like it depends on who I'm talking to. Whenever someone goes on their first strike, I steal that line. Hey, you popped your first cherry. Or you popped your cherry.
That's right.
But,
you learn the two most important things in life. You don't you don't scab, and right. Yeah. Fair enough. Let me grab the. So here is what we
Both
are.
of us love our country.
All right. Promising beginning. Both of them love their country. So just to set up a little bit what we are going to watch. We will see as we stop and comment and whatever. If we don't get, I have a pretty hard out around 10. So if we don't get through all of this, I'm just gonna have to leave everybody at the edge of their seats about how the story ends. But Well, I'll just skip ahead and spoil how the story ends because this is conversations from a while back. You actually found this and sent it to me when we were talking about what to talk about.
Yeah, I haven't watched the whole thing yet, so I'm just kind of curious how it ends. Like these two fucking grifters. Like,
So
I just want to see how they frame their grift to make it sound like politics.
Yeah, so at the end, well, what I was going to say about spoiling how the story ends is this conversation happened a few months ago, but like last week, on Twitter, saw JD Vance, like Charlie Kirk tweeted out his endorsement of JD Vance as a candidate, and Vance saying, I'm honored to accept the endorsement of one of the most important leaders of our movement. So, you know, if there are any conservatives who are watching right now, I just want you to do some thinking about what kind of movement you're in here. But in any case,
this still here kind of looks like a bromance. The way JD is looking longingly at Charlie.
Yeah, it's it does. The thing I find hilarious about JD Vance, and this does kind of set up the general theme, and also, this is part of why when you brought this up, I was immediately like, oh yeah, I definitely want to watch this, is that, so people watching may be familiar. I am, well, actually, this is good. So there's a chat from Silver Harlow saying, Ben Burgess, isn't Kirk the guy? We were doing charity to get you to debate. Whatever happened to that? Yeah, that actually, your efforts were not in vain. So there's a website, debate hosting website called Town Circle with an S, where they approached me about using it to offer, debate to someone. And the way it works is people can pledge like charitable donations, and it's like GoFundMe. It only kicks in if the thing happens, and it looked for a while like it wasn't gonna, there was like enough. I mean, I don't, I won't swear to, I don't know what the quality of these meals is, seems pretty cheap, but like, but like 11,000, meals for people who need them, like enough had been raised for that. But it was about to expire and it didn't look like it was going to happen. And then it did. But the reason, when I was talking to those guys, they suggested Charlie Kirk as a person that I could try to talk to. Yeah, my first reaction was like, why? Right? What's and then the more I thought about it, the more it made sense to me, because usually when I debate right wingers, it's like libertarians who, if we're going to be really like honest about this, maybe there's certain things about them that are interesting or consistent or whatever, but like, they also represent like 1% of actually existing reactionaries in the United States. Whereas somebody like Charlie Kirk actually represents, quite a few of them, right? Certainly a hell of a lot more than the, person who has some like medieval scholastic thing about exactly how to interpret the non-aggression principle. And what I wanted to do it on, so what the challenge was about and what the thing is ultimately going to be about, is the democratic Trumpian populism versus democratic socialism, because Kirk was a big Trump guy. I mean, Turning Points USA ran Students for Trump ultimately in the 2020 election, and he's endorsed JD Vance now, who, as we're going to see, despite, and I cannot get over this part, like the guy was the author of Hillbilly Elegy, which is the approximate like redneck equivalent of like being like the token black conservative who's gonna like get on Fox and talk about how actually has economic disparities between white people and black people have nothing to do with the legacy of Jim Crow. It's all about bad culture and dependency. So he wrote Hillbilly Elegy, but somehow he did this turn, and now he says he's an economic populist, and which is certainly the language that Trump was speaking also, at least initially. And that's that's really what I want to fight with Charlie about, because it just seems to me like, say that Trump or JD Vance or any of these people are, populists, that they're interested in like helping like the little guys against the corporate leader or whatever. Like, this just seems like bullshit on a level that you should be able to see from space. Like, none of these guys support, like, okay, populist is a vague word, but like, if it's going to mean anything at all, it should be that you want to do things that benefit most people at the expense of some sort of elite group. And like, what do these guys want to do that's going to benefit most people? Do they want to pay them more money? Do they want to give them health care? Like, even if we decide that like undocumented workers from Mexico like don't count as ordinary people for some reason, like and exclude them, like, okay, great. Like, what's the seems pretty arbitrary, but like, even with that, like, what do any of these people want to do that's going to materially benefit any like working class person, like, working class person in like Michigan or Illinois? Like, nothing. Yeah.
And it's interesting. Charlie Kirk, Nick Fuentes, and Tim Pool are all from Chicago suburbs. And actually, my brother-in-law went to high school with Charlie Kirk, and he didn't know him at all. But the one thing he said about him was he was like one of those tall kids who thought they were very good at basketball, who only played against, on an all-white team against other white teams. So he kind of had this sense of being good at basketball, but never really played against anyone good.
Wow.
It might be, the way he handles himself in the political arena. I don't know. But he's met his match in you.
Well, let's hope so. That's happening on so this coming Friday, and it's like pre-recorded, and then they're gonna. So it's gonna be like the Town Circle guys are gonna be there, but it's like in the TPUSA studio, and then it's gonna be on Kirk's show, and then after like an embargo, like the Town Circle people can rebroadcast it, and I can rebroadcast it. So it should be coming up pretty soon. But meanwhile, let's watch this meeting of the minds.
And we have that in common amongst many other things. We're also live now on WABC New York, 77 on the dial, and very honored to have our inaugural week. And JD, we're honored to have you also. And we're on a station in Cleveland as well. And so you're thinking of maybe possibly sort of one day running for something.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm thinking pretty seriously about running for Senate in Ohio. So for all the Cleveland listeners now out there, take notes, or at least take notes on the things you like that I say and ignore the things you don't like that I say.
That's good. Now, it's becoming, if you maybe sort of almost might run, I think I said that right.
Yeah, that's right.
There's a lot of people maybe running for that seat.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty crowded. There are a lot of folks running. I mean, it's an open Senate seat. So Rob Portman, current U.S. Senator, he's retiring. Ohio is becoming a redder state. So I think a lot of people see the opportunity. But, if we pull the trigger, I think we got a really good chance because, frankly, the things we're going to talk about, the message that I have is just, I think, a little bit more where the actual voters are. And I think they recognize that we're getting a little bit screwed by our woke corporations, and somebody's got to do something about it.
Well, and so I want to explore that with you for the.
All right, we're not going to keep pausing at intervals just like this short, but I do want to just note, like, you caught the key qualifier there, right?
The woke corporations.
Yes, the woke corporations. So it's
That's
not that we're being
dialectics.
It's not that we're being screwed by the corporations. We're being screwed by the woke corporations.
Mm-hmm.
I think anytime these guys use phrases like that, it's like the woke capital, is something that the people like this with intellectual pretensions say. And it's like, I don't know. It's not that hard to figure out that like they don't actually object to the capital; they object to the wokeness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like when people put that label crony capitalism on capitalism when they just mean like capitalism existing as it does, as it wants to exist.
Yeah. Well, when people say, "Oh, capitalism is fine," it's just crony capitalism, it's bad. I mean, what they're saying is, it would be fine to have a system that leads to a incredibly unequal distribution of resources, as long as we could somehow magically guarantee that rich people didn't use their wealth to gain political influence and break the rules in their favor. It's like, okay, like what's the plan for that?
But what is woke capitalism? Is that like having trans couples in McDonald's commercials? Is that what they're saying the problem is?
I guess. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, it's like you said, woke capitalism. Like what they're seem to be objecting to is like corporations doing woke things, which could just be like performative inclusivity in commercials, like your example, and it could be like it could be, I don't know, like bringing in Robin DiAngelo to like yell at people at trainings.
I could find common ground with them if they want to keep Robin DiAngelo out of our workplaces.
No,
like, that is something I will team up on.
Yeah, I'm with.
Although I don't think I would like their messaging. I mean, it would be their anti-CRT messaging, is what it would be.
No, that's right. That's right. Like all the things they say in support of it are nonsense. But like, yeah, to the extent that the upshot is like nobody should have to like, be like yelled at, about like their invisible internalized whiteness, like while they're at work. Then it's like, yeah, no, I mean, I'm with you on that. Like that shouldn't happen. But I mean, I think it's also like super revealing that it's like, yeah, they object to corporations doing woke things. They don't really object to anything that corporations do that's in the service of their actual primary objective, right? I mean, like, maybe McDonald's will, try to pander to one group or another with commercials, but like McDonald's is not a corporation that primarily exists for the purposes of like promoting trans rights. People will bring up like anti-racism trainings at the Pentagon. It's like, okay, the Pentagon does not exist for the purposes of anti-racism.
I wonder how they feel about the new McDonald's policy of no more of those crappy toys in the Happy Meals, because those are, kids throws those all the time. Like they're not like they used to be, where you get excited, you get like a Garfield glass or something. They are contributing to like filling up our landfills. And like, damn, I wonder if there's going to be a culture war around bringing back the Happy Meal toy.
Yeah, well, I mean,
these damn woke corporations.
There too, I'm with them, but that seems like a nice thing for kids. But yeah, like what they're objected to is corporations doing stuff that's either like mildly positive, like hey, we could feed, we could like make some generic statement of support for something, socially beneficial, or, we can like gesture at something in an ad is like kind of neutral, I guess, to like annoying and, legitimately kind of objectionable, like having the like self-criticism sessions at work. Like, but it's like they're objecting to all this stuff, but it's like, that's not really how corporations are screwing most people over. Like this is this extremely secondary thing. Like ultimately, McDonald's is about making money for shareholders at McDonald's. The Pentagon is, ultimately also about making money for shareholders at McDonald's, but like, but like in a more immediate sense, like, they're like people who might sign off on like the anti-racism trainings at the Pentagon. What they primarily care about is that like the bombs keep on falling on, Yemenis, that
it's just a part of their advertising budget that's devoted to something else than they normally would. And, the argument that the right wingers make is that like, that means that the fact that wokeness is so big is the problem itself. And they think that McDonald's is promoting wokeness and Nike and all that, but really they're riding the wave of the fact that, this language is popular now. And this inclusivity is popular now. But like, like true chuds are not going to like look at the roots of, you know, what they perceive to be the problems.
Exactly. Like, you know, McDonald's would be equally happy to do, you know, like if we were in some cultural moment, you know, where like the 1920s, you know, where, you know, that's before McDonald's existed, right? You know, like if this were like the 1920s when like the KKK was actually like a popular organization, and, you know, and had like mass membership and would do like open public events, and politicians would join it and stuff like that. Like McDonald's would be equally happy like have people like, you know, standing around in like the white hoods, you know, like munching on French fries in their commercials, like totally fine with them either way.
There was that Denny's rival called Sambo's, and like I think there might be a couple more locations somewhere in America, but that used to be fairly common. I remember in the Chicago suburbs there was one.
Oh my God, when was this?
Like my memory is early 80s, but
wow,
like I think the franchise started way back in the day when, like, you know, the book, the little I think it was called Little Black Sambo, was an actual children's book. They branded all their franchises like that.
Yeah. I mean, that's like the people. Like the most sophisticated version of the woke capital thing will be like, well, it's because these people are indoctrinated in colleges with all their wokeness, and then, you know, they have certain skills, they get hired by. Trust me, if they wanted to pivot in a different direction, they could find people to, you know, to fill up all of these positions, you know, who are like rabidly anti-woke. There are always more people, you know, who want to have powerful positions, you know, in corporate hierarchies that will get the jobs. And lots of the people, in fact, lots of those same specific people, like, trust me, nothing they learned in college is more important to them than making money. Like, there's lots of those same exact people would be equally happy to take the check for like doing the cinematography on the KKK McDonald's commercial, you know, if like that's what they thought would make the money. So anyway, I did just want to really highlight that just because it's such a ridiculous bait and switch. Like, you know, like when I actually just saw a video earlier today of Ted Cruz, who was talking about how, you know, the media was all over kids in cages and during Trump, but not now during Biden, which, you know, in a weird way, he's not wrong about. But you know, he might be drawing the wrong conclusion. But in the course of making that point, he said the corrupt corporate media. It's like, Jesus Christ! Like, when did this happen? That like people like Ted Cruz sound like, you know, Democracy Now! Guests from 2007. You know. And I think that, you know, like, but it's always this trick, you know, that it's like they've kind of learned that like it sounds populist if they sprinkle the word corporate around everything. But
as if Fox News wasn't a corporation. Yeah,
as if Fox News wasn't a corporation. Exactly. Like it's not, you know, all of the, as if Ted Cruz, you know, weren't like swimming in corporate, you know, campaign contributions. And like even taken literally, like I remember Carl Bayer pointed this out on Twitter, like when people say, you know, like, you know, if people legitimately like capitalism but don't like corporations, like what's the principle? You just like really object to limited liability. But yeah, they've learned that sprinkling the word corporate around everything makes it sound populist, but like this is always the trick, you know. It's like, oh, the woke corporations, you know, are screwing us over. So it's like, yeah, they could be just as predatory towards, you know, 99% of the population, but like, you know, if they just didn't like put the black square on the company website, you know, the last summer for Black Lives Matter, these people would have no problem with them.
He's going to look at his, you know, FEC filings, and any corporation that's not bundling for him, now that's a woke corporation. He's going to do the Al Sharpton thing, but, you know, make it racist, or, you know.
Yeah. It's like yeah, right. The Al Sharpton, anybody who's not funding me as a racist. It's going to be the Ted Cruz, anybody who's not funding me as a woke corporation. Exactly. All right, let's actually see if we can watch a decent chunk of this.
Next 2 hours we have you. We have obvious breaks in between. On the live stream, we're going to be taking some questions as well. There's a bunch of topics I want to get to, but let's start there, because I think that what you hit on outside of the corporation piece, which I completely agree, is where is the Republican Party right now? And I think that there's a really promising yet depressing trend. The promising trend is the voters are actually on the right side of these issues. Our leaders tend not to be. It seems as if they're a lagging indicator of where the voters are. A great example is Asa Hutchinson, who is bought and paid for by either the Walton family or the Chicken family, whatever it is in Arkansas, right? That somehow Asa Hutchinson wants children to be able to chemically castrate themselves. I think Tucker did a phenomenal job of exposing that. And he's like stunned and shocked that he can't invoke the spirit of Bill Buckley and Ronald Reagan, and all of a sudden all the criticism goes away. Right? That's basically how that interview went. He's like, exactly right. I'm going to mention Ronald Reagan and Bill Buckley, and everyone's going to take it easy. Like, no, actually, our party's a lot different than the pro-corporate party of 1992.
I promise we'll listen in 30 seconds.
There's just so many nuggets of bullshit that just hit you right away.
I can't let that chemical castration thing go. That's just too stupid. Like, what he's talking about are reversible hormone blockers. That's and I mean, we can have, like, if you want to have a nuanced conversation about exactly at what age and how much counseling you should go through or whatever, like, I think those are things that, like, reasonable people with good values and good intentions, can like hash out. But like, this is just this is just kind of gross, because it's just scoring culture war points at the expense of like 13-year-olds, who might be, going through some pretty miserable experiences, and have a legitimate interest in getting medical help, but like, it sounds scary if you say chemical castration. Also, the Republican Party is not any less pro-corporate in 2021 than it was in 2012. That is just an amazing claim to make.
Yeah, that's just out of thin air. It seems.
Really? So what are some examples of some policies the Republican Party supported in 1992 that they're against now? Like, have they turned around to the minimum wage? They do want to give everybody health care now. like tell me, like, the pro-corporate policies.
I mean, literally, like, even the ridiculous ones of like an amendment against flag burning, that they're still holding the torch on that. Zero change.
Yeah, there's nothing. There's nothing that's like, I mean, like, if anything, the only actual changes are maybe some cultural stuff, just because, like, as the culture evolves over time, the goalposts get shifted, and they're not necessarily going to die on all the same hills that they used to or whatever. Like, that happens to an extent, although I also don't think that should be exaggerated, because, like, the evangelicals who were the shock troops in 1992 are pretty much still the shock troops now. And they're not going to. Republican politicians aren't going to say anything that's going to piss them off too much. So they might, like, quietly stop fighting about same-sex marriage, but they won't, like, say, actually, just for the record, now we think that's cool. But
Pat Robertson is still alive and just as unhinged as he's always been.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, maybe some of the cultural stuff might evolve a little bit, but, like, yeah, I mean, economically, like, the idea that the GOP is, like, even 1% less pro-corporate than in 1992 is just, like, weird. It's a weird thing to say, as if it were just obviously true. All right, let's go.
Walk us through where you think the voters actually are and how some Republican leaders are still somewhat shell-shocked by this.
Yeah, so you're exactly right. There's like a civil war within the Republican leadership class about where the party should go, but there just isn't one among the voters. The voters feel very strongly that there's a direction that we should pursue. Call it America first, call it populist, whatever. And so the voters, I think, are very, very awoke to this stuff. The thing that is so weird about the Asa Hutchinson thing or any of these other debates is, people constantly invoke these principles that have sort of become slogans. And when you're using a slogan, you're not really thinking anymore, right? So Asa Hutchinson kept on saying to Tucker Carlson, well, what about limited government, right? The government can't do these things. It can't prevent the chemical prevention of puberty. And it's like, well, if the government can't do that, what can it actually do? And of course, if you think about the entire gender debate in this country right now, it's driven by a lot of government policy. What are we teaching in schools? What are the things that are happening in universities that are funded by the government that are making their way ideologically onto our college campuses, onto our high schools, even increasingly our middle and elementary schools? That's all government power that the left is using to accomplish its vision of society. And I always say the biggest difference between right and left in this country, it's not small government, big government, social conservative, progressive, whatever the case may be. It's that the left is willing to use power to accomplish its vision of society, and conservative leaders are terrified of it. It's like, we don't want to use political power to accomplish anything for our voters. And the voters are saying, you've got the corporations on one side, you've got the cultural institutions on the other side. If we can't use political power to accomplish something good for ourselves, then we're screwed. We're going to lose our country.
So there's been about maybe half a dozen moments where I watch something and I actually say when I'm watching my computer or a podcast, I'm like, that makes sense. And you gave a speech at the Edmund Burke Foundation Society.
Sure.
And you said this, and I said, oh my gosh, of course. Of course we have the power that and then you said something, I don't even think you realized how brilliant it was. You said, we didn't take this power. It was given to us by the people.
That's right.
So the people voted for us. We didn't stage some sort of coup. We didn't overthrow the Romanovs.
Right.
Like, we went through the proper channels as outlined in this amazing document, the U.S. Constitution, to actually improve people's lives. And I also think there's a misunderstanding of what liberty is. Liberty in the American sense is not liberty in the French sense. Liberty is to pursue virtue.
Yes.
Not to go seek pleasure endlessly and that you can go redefine your own truth. That's a French value. The American value is to go and pursue virtue and truth, appreciate beauty and wonder, and preserve the good.
Absolutely. Yeah, we talked a lot, in elementary school, right? What is America about? You hear it all the time. It's about freedom.
All right. Two quick things. I love your comment, Kenzo. A woke is okay, woke is bad. Because there's something very funny about this. Like, I was thinking about this a little while ago that that woke and red pilled are exactly the same metaphor. It's just like a weird happenstance that like conservatives who don't like women, I guess those are the main people who use that term, are the ones who got to the Matrix analogy first, because otherwise, otherwise people would be, you'd have progressive people, talking ruefully about how everybody has a pre-red pill period.
One thing that caught me was it's brilliant messaging from the right wingers is calling it the gender debate, because it's not really a gender debate, but by just framing it that way, they could throw any kind of arguments they want at it. And it reminds me of when the right wingers were trying to get evolution taught in school, and they kept hitting a brick wall until they said, well, we need to just teach the debate, teach the discussion of evolution versus creation. And, they were able to sneak it into some districts that way.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Which is funny because I don't see a lot of those guys saying we should teach the debate about critical race theory.
Mm-hmm.
Which would be my approach. We could I mean, look, I'm perfectly happy to assign some Derek Bell and assign some Adolph Reed, and let the kids figure out who's right. But yeah. So that was one thing, and then just the second comment was Vive la France. So if letting people if letting people just live their lives and try to be happy is a degenerate French value, I don't know. Makes France sound pretty good to me.
And they sound like they know something. They sound like there are these multiple interpretations of liberty, and not just like the libertarians and the far right didn't just take over that word at one point.
Yeah, right. Which is a weird thing that like Charlie is doing here, and he did it. He did it in the his debate with Vosh too. I mean, he didn't say the France thing, which is much funnier. That like, because I don't know, that just is funny to say. It's like, oh, that's a French value. But he said. He said the same thing because like Vosh kind of took the like, well, ultimately I care about freedom and letting everybody live their lives so they want to, and etc. And Charlie was like, oh no, that's just degeneracy. And it's like, well, there is something honest about the fact that he is one of the few conservatives who will acknowledge that there are like multiple conceptions of freedom and not just ones that serve conservative ideas. Which again, points for honesty, but obviously, I'm on Team France.
Me too. Doing whatever you want. That sounds great. Pleasure. It's called pleasure. Of course we love it.
Yeah. It's yeah, man, that's a weird position, I don't like pleasure.
Anti-pleasure, yeah.
Anti-pleasure,
although that is also very honest.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. All right.
About liberty, like the freedom to do what, right? Like freedom when I was a 7-year-old boy or a 14-year-old kid was not like sitting at home, playing watching Netflix and watching porn and doing all these terrible things. It was like actually like meaningfully participating in society, right? That's what freedom was. It wasn't just like sitting at home by yourself and like, not being an especially virtuous person. It was participating meaningfully in society. The founders' conception of liberty was that you get to participate in this project of self-government. Well, how do you participate in the project of self-government? Well, you can start a family. You can pursue happiness. You can work at a good job. You can start your own business. You can do something meaningful in the commercial sector. But it's also you get to speak your mind. That's what the First Amendment, of course, is all about. You get to participate in the public debate about this country. And the freedom that's maybe most under threat in our country right now, it's not like the government not telling you what to do or the government telling you what to do. It's a corporation that's increasingly telling us that if you say the wrong things, you could lose your job, you could be censored on social media, which of course is the modern medium of communication. So the most important American liberty, maybe, at least one of them, is the freedom of participation in this democratic society of ours. If you can't speak your mind, you don't have that liberty. Those are the freedoms we should be talking about, not just the freedom to smoke a lot of weed.
Right, and that's seeking pleasure. Animals seek pleasure. Right. Aristotle famously said we are the speaking beings.
Exactly.
Speech is what differentiates us from a giraffe.
Yes.
A giraffe can go seek pleasure.
Yeah. There's this weird way, and I think this is a pretty modern thing where like the past 30 or 40 years, freedom just meant getting to do whatever you want in the pursuit of pleasure. It's a perversion of freedom. Yeah, it's absolutely a perversion of freedom, because if you're enslaved to your basest desires, you're not actually a free person. You're not a virtuous person as our founding fathers would have understood it. So it's not even that it's like not the same thing as founders' freedom or the founders' conception of freedom. It's that it's actually antithetical to it.
Yes. Aristotle said that you will become fatted cattle. And I love that visual. Yeah. Like that's basically what America has become. You eat all day and you really don't do much. You have a lot of pleasure, but you're not pursuing the good. And that's what the founders always understood is the moral underpinning. And we're running up against a break here, but I want to explore this with you of how this happened, because it was subtle at first. It was gradual, then sudden. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. And now we have a group of our leaders of the opposition party, whatever that is now, and I still think it's trying to figure it out, where they are saying, wait a second, I can't just give a press conference on corporate tax cuts and invoke a slogan of defeat socialism, and somehow my voters are still upset with me. They're a little bit confused by that. Super quick.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I think people recognize that something is really wrong in our society, and the old slogans just aren't going to cut it anymore.
That was really quick.
You told me to be really quick.
That was said by a
That was
master
too quick?
communicator. You have another 38 seconds. You could do better than that.
Okay.
That's
Well,
bumper sticker good.
yeah. Okay. Well, I think that the way I expound on this a little bit is people recognize that something's really wrong in our society, right? They see what's happening in our schools, in our communities. They see with the COVID pandemic and the lockdowns. There's just this sense that things aren't going the way that they should be going. And in the face of that, you can't just say the same things that people have heard for the past 40 years. They instinctively recognize, well, that didn't work. It's not working anymore. We need to hear something different.
Hold on to that point. JD Vance here on the Charlie Kirk Show. If you're looking for a way to save some extra money, why not start by paying less interest on your credit card balances? Refinance with a credit card consolidation loan from Lightstream. It's an easy way to save hundreds of thousands of dollars and lower your interest rate. Lightstream offers credit card consolidation loans from 5.95% APR with auto pay and excellent credit. That's lower than the average credit card interest rate of over 18%.
I want to know
interest rate.
I want to know which founding fathers are talking about. Like, I understand, like, they get very defensive when you just criticize the founding fathers for, hypocrisy, but they're saying that they were like anti-pleasure, where like, which ones? The ones that were raping their slaves, the ones that were members of the Hellfire Club, like those guys were like hedonists when they weren't, walled up in a room drafting documents.
Yeah, that is a very good question. I'd also be a little bit curious about who counts as a founding father, because the guy who wrote the Declaration of Independence was a big fan of France and the French Revolution. So I don't know. I mean, did he not have the degenerate French, conception of liberty?
And we all know how strong John Hancock's right hand was. So if Pornhub existed, he may have been there, I would not have wanted to see a founding father's browser history. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, it's weird though too, because it's like, okay, I don't know. I mean, again, if the Declaration of Independence is relevant to what the founding fathers as a group thought, I mean, as somebody pointed out in the chat, the phrase "the pursuit of happiness" is like right there at the beginning of the document. Seems to be pretty important to the conception. And it's one thing to say like, oh, you're not having like a really good, fulfilling life if you're just slave to your desires, you're whatever, jacking off and eating Cheetos, and really it's only with family and community or whatever, like fill out the details how you want, that you'll get the fulfilling life. And maybe you find that convincing and maybe you don't. I mean, I would say that we could also play this game in the other direction, like, oh, well, you're just being a slave to social expectations, and not like going out and pursuing, your happiness. But like whoever you think is right there, like, I mean, and this is not some radical socialist thought. Like, this is just like, I don't know. I mean, I would think like pretty basic, democratic freedom stuff. Like, you don't want, like, there's a distinction between saying, here's what I think the best kind of life is for somebody to leave, and like, everybody should have to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I hope there's a difference between those two things.
Yeah, it's not a political program. Like, there are YouTubers and TikTokers that like, that's their whole shtick is like, you got to hustle, like that hustle mindset, and they'll, sell their vitamins or whatever in the process. But like, yeah, it's as a political program, do they want a state that's going to like ban certain types of sex? Do they want a state that's going to ban, certain substances? Like, what does this mean to like, have a political program around, this kind of morality that they're pushing?
Yeah, I mean, like one way of seeing the point is, JD Vance was talking earlier about people being censored or fired, for saying the wrong thing. I do share
I have a
some of
solution
those.
for that.
Yeah, exactly.
I know you know what I'm thinking.
Yeah, exactly. Which I think that the solution is to make it harder to fire people, and there is an institution that serves exactly that purpose. That we could have more of and make it easier to organize.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I agree with the concern. I'm not quite sure what his solution is. To be honest, I don't think he really has a solution.
Mm-hmm.
I think he just knows that it's an effective talking point to complain about it. But whatever, all right. So here's a way to see the point: is what he's objected to firing people for having correct opinions, or firing people for having any opinions? Because if it's just people shouldn't be fired for their opinions if their opinion is right, then whatever, Stalin could agree with that. That's not, obviously the devil's in the details of who's right, but but that's something nobody's going to disagree with. People shouldn't be fired for their views if they have the right views. All of the, disagreements could be about which views are right, but nobody disagrees with that. It seems like it's only something that you could describe as freedom if it's nobody should be fired, even for having bad or stupid or morally wrong views. And shouldn't the same go for how you live your life in general? That okay, maybe the correct way to do this. I know. I think JD Vance is actually a adult convert to Catholicism, which is, I've got to say, a pretty weird look for somebody who's for somebody whose whole shtick is about his hillbilly cultural authenticity. But whatever, so maybe the right, maybe, in his mind, the best way to live your life is to, have a big Catholic family, and believe in God and send your kids to parochial school and have 20 kids, whatever. Okay. But again, it seems like it's only freedom if that's one option, but you also have other options, and if you if you want to be in a polyamorous gay relationship, you can do that too, and it's up to you.
It's interesting too, because that was a big fear mongering within the right wing, was that the Catholics are coming here and having lots of children. They're going to supplant our values with theirs, and they'll be taking their direction from the Vatican. And, eventually the Christians were like, well, we all, believe in the same dude, and we all hate abortion. So let's come together. Because, at one point, being a Catholic, I grew up in Chicago, so being a Catholic was not a big deal. Everyone was, but you drive a state over either way, it's a very different story.
Yeah, right. Which is actually really interesting. That I think one thing that is definitely true about American Christianity as a whole is that it has become crazily more ecumenical in the last few decades. I mean, there are old quotes from Pat Robertson where he's like, "Oh, people say I should be nice to the Presbyterians, nice to the Episcopalians. Why should I be nice to the spirit of the Antichrist?" I think that's the exact quote.
It's a lesson in solidarity that we can learn from the religious right.
But by 2012, the GOP nominated a Mormon ex-bishop as their presidential candidate, and Pat Robertson was fine with that. He didn't care. They learned to bury. Yes, it's exactly. It's they seem to all be very comradely about it now and be a good model, for the left.
Marxist, Leninist, and Democratic Socialists take note.
Exactly.
The Charlie Kirk show today, which is a lot of fun. We are just starting. Email us your questions, freedom@charliekirk.com. Be right back. Hey, everybody. Charlie Kirk here. Radio stations across the country. Special hello to our inaugural week on WABC in New York City. Also, we are on air right now in Cleveland, AM 560 The Answer in Chicago, AM 960 The Patriot. I'm trying to learn all the call signs. JD, welcome back. So you said something interesting. I want to explore this with you. You said that saying we stand for limited government is not enough.
Yep.
Build that out a little bit.
Well, I think that saying you stand for limited government, it's a principle, it's a good principle, but I think in the Republican Party, it's become a little bit too much of a slogan where we're unwilling to use political power, even when it's been given to us by the people to do something for them, right? And so, we like the classic example that's going around in conservative circles right now is, what do we do about woke capital, right? Like, well, what is woke capital, right? Well, first of all, these corporations are incorporated by the government. They exist and are able to earn a profit because of the American nation state, our system of law and order, our U.S. Navy that protects their trade routes. And when they interject themselves into our democratic process, there are a lot of people on the establishment right who say, well, we can't do anything about them because they're a private company. Well, they're not really just private companies. They're chartered by the U.S. government, and they're chartered to affect a social purpose. We decided as a people we were going to give these corporations certain protections so that they could accomplish a goal. Well, if they're not accomplishing that goal anymore, why are we still giving them the special protections?
Yes.
You can't shout limited government every time somebody says we want to use political power for the purpose that we were given it for.
And I think...
Okay, that is super interested.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just hear J.D. Vance say and Charlie Kirk agree that limited government doesn't mean that you can't tell corporations what to do because corporations are chartered by the government. Like, man,
That's
you
what we've been saying.
Yeah, exactly. But that is a hell of a thing for for two conservatives to agree to.
Mm-hmm.
Like I really want to test this out, right? I mean, can we tax them more? Can we put in more labor protections? Like make them pay people more.
I'm almost thinking though that like they're not being specific at all. So like whoever the viewer is can kind of fill up that with whatever they're pissed about that day. It could be a trans couple in a McDonald's commercial. It could be Facebook banning them. I'm sure there's a lot of angry uncles watching this thinking about like literally like Zuckerberg, the Rothschilds banning me on Facebook. Damn it, I'm going to give money to JD Vance now because he's going to make that not happen. He's going to end the woke corporations.
Yeah. No, I'm sure. Like, and this is why. Also, I think the other reason that vagueness is important is that beyond like vagueness about exactly what they're talking about, like even when they are somewhat clear what they're talking about, like the thing about firing people and censoring them, like, okay, like what's the solution? And that they're just going to be impossibly vague about. Like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
JD Vance is going to somehow make it so that Facebook can't ban me after I say something dumb or whatever. Like, okay, how? What is he going to do? What is JD Vance going to do to make it harder to fire people? I know it's not make it easier to organize unions, but like I'm 100% sure that's not JD's solution. So what is he going to do? Like is he going to change labor laws in some way or support changing labor laws in some way to make it harder to fire people? I'm not holding my breath. But this is just like one of those things that like I think that if they make it clear they're really upset about something, then people who are upset about the same thing will feel like they're being listened to and like these guys are on their side. But it's really, it's no different than like when centrist Democrats talk about structural racism. It's like, okay, awesome. So like what structures are we talking about? How are you going to change them?
Yeah, they just put the word structure in front of racism and they make it sound like it's more official, kind of like bodies in space instead of people in place. Like it's signaling that like what I'm doing is a much deeper than what's really at hand.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's like, yeah, I always want to like, God, I wish there was some way to like force these people to like, tell me what structure, right? Like, like I know you're not talking about capitalism. You're fine with that. Like, what structure is this? But like, no, they can express enough concern about racial disparities, and then they hope appeal to people who have the same concerns, even though there's absolutely nothing that any of these people support that would actually do anything about that. And this is the same thing in the other direction. It's like, yeah, I mean, so you don't like, you don't like the idea that you could be fired for a tweet. Fair enough. But, he doesn't have a solution. He's just going to like, he's just going to express the concern. I mean, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I would put somebody down right now that there's nowhere in the remainder of this discussion when either of them is going to explain exactly what the like law that they support is that would be relevant to anything they're saying right now.
Some of the conservatives that say that, and trust me, I like limited government, but I can tell you why I like it. And that's important. And so I never try to use limited government anymore. I'm going to tell you the new phrase I think we should use. But I think some conservatives that say that, they have an understandable fear, this kind of, we're going to get into a Soviet state if we were ever to not limit government.
Yep.
Well, a little bit of a newsflash. You've done an awful job limiting government. Fourth branch of government is as more powerful as ever. The civil service controls everything.
Sure.
So what I think they're really saying, and I want to offer an olive branch a little bit of grace, is they're saying we believe in limited power.
Sure.
We believe that a small group of people controlling something without a check and a balance is a bad thing. I agree. So explain to me why you're okay with Microsoft having that kind of power. And that argument wouldn't have really meshed 15 years ago because these companies weren't that powerful.
That's right.
And the people that ran their companies actually loved the country.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you go to Palm Springs, if you go to Palm Beach, and you go to these retirement communities of the CEOs that used to run these companies, the guys in their 80s and 90s, I know a lot of them, they are stunned at what's happening.
Yep.
I'm talking about the guys that ran Waste Management.
Sure.
The guys that ran Home Depot. And they say, if I were to have done this in the early 2000s,
he had an uncle who was in Waste Management.
And the next one we have is quite long, so we can get into this. But how is it that we went from an American corporate governing class that quite honestly is now retired and loved the country and the generations that preceded it, to now the current class, like Ed Bastian and James Quincy, that talk no differently than a college professor? How did that happen?
I think a couple of things that happened. So first is in the 1950s, when GM said what's good for GM is good for America, they were, maybe being a little cute, but that was basically true, right? What was good for GM was good for America. They paid their workers great wages. People
was good for the UAW
family. That was the lead edge of the tech economy of the 1950s, was the automobile.
Yeah, I mean, really, this is worth actually pausing and taking just a second on. Like, why does J.D. Vance think that General Motors paid workers good wages in the 1950s? Does he think that was just came from the benevolence of the owners because they were like good patriotic people who loved the country?
And then how did wokeness come into be to like degrade everyone's working conditions? That's another question like I have is like, maybe he does have a theory about how wokeness broke, labor's back. I'd like to hear it. I don't think we're gonna.
Yeah, I mean, I was a kid in the 80s, so it's possible that my memories are hazy. But like during that period, like the Roger and me era, I don't remember a lot of wokeness in the culture.
Well, you remember the movie Gung Ho, right?
I actually don't know.
Oh, you got to see that. It's about this Japanese corporation that takes over an American car plant and then tries to do things differently. And it's, I mean, it has its moments. Michael Keaton's very funny in it, but it is very, very unwoke about the depictions of Japanese people in it.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And it definitely was like banking on a lot of the just the anger and hostility towards, Japanese motors. And like, yeah, the question there wasn't, well, maybe we just should have had stronger unions to keep Japanese management out.
Yeah, I mean it's so ridiculous. Like there are, that's, yeah, I mean in the real world, the reason that GM paid people good wages in the 1950s is that in the 1930s, the UAW was built by people like my great grandfather through sit down strikes, and managed to achieve recognition, and like also create enough instability to bring about more favorable labor laws, and that those were unionized workforces, and part of the of course it didn't hurt that most of America's biggest industrial competitors had like their industrial base bombed the shit out of in World War II, so they didn't, the companies weren't feeling the squeeze as much, competitively to like have quite as much of an incentive to crack down. But like there were really recent, really militant labor struggles that like brought about those good wages. And it was still the case, that I mean, like the people who were like, even in the 1950s, the people, the people who were running the UAW then, like, I don't, were very imperfect, and I don't like their Cold War politics, but like, but there were like, they were like certainly by 2021 standards, like very solid, like left social democrats, and again, we're veterans of those incredibly militant struggles that had happened like 15 years ago. So like, and when all of that started to reverse itself, in the 70s, and really especially the 80s and 90s, like none of that had anything to do with cultural trends that like weren't going to start for another 20 years after that.
If Google said what's good for Google in 2020 is good for America, is that actually true? If Apple said that? Of course it's not true, right? Apple actively undercuts American workers by paying slaves in China to make its iPhones, and then it comes back to America and virtue signals and tries to wag its finger at normal American people about their basic viewpoint on the world. And so what's happened is that a lot of these companies have started to realize, think of the NBA, for example. The NBA's biggest new market is in China. Everybody's asking, why is the NBA so anti-American, but it never calls out what's going on in China? Because the NBA has more of a financial upside in China than it does in the United States, than it does in its own country. And so 50, 60 years ago, we used to recognize that these companies had some national obligations. They had some national purpose. And now we just see them as purely commercial enterprises, purely disconnected from the American nation state. And if they make their money in China, they're going to be on the side of the Chinese than the American people. That's a real problem, because they're not just commercial entities. They're part of the American fabric of society.
And you have companies that are literally called American Airlines.
Yeah.
They fly around the American flag that pander more to Wuhan than West Virginians.
Yeah. That's absolutely right. The other thing that's going on, and this is part of the answer to the question too, is that our entire educated cultural class has gotten obsessively anti-American, and that's started to import itself into these companies, right? So what was 20 years ago a crazy idea on a college campus is now like mainstream for a 40-year-old upper level employee at some of these big companies.
And I think Trump was an accelerant for that. I want to talk about it. And It's not a critique of him. I just think it's a fact.
Yep.
Charlie Kirk here with JD Vance. We're having a lot of fun. Stay right there. Be right back.
You're listening to The Charlie Kirk Show.
Hey, everybody. Charlie.
Awesome.
Yeah. I just couldn't handle that you have companies literally named American
It's
Airlines.
literally called American Airlines.
It's because, that the culture was pro-America at one point, and now it's going to be called, I don't know, Black Trans Lesbian Grandma Airlines.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm staking out the reasonable center here in this, that my sensible centrist position is that I really don't give a shit one way or the other. I just want to know how much Black Trans Lesbian Grandma Airlines is paying its flight attendants.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
If our
I wish Sarah Nelson was on this right now. I would love her take on that, because I think she'd agree with you. Give us good benefits, time off.
Yeah, call it whatever the hell you want. Just just like what are we going to get paid? How much time off do we get? Yeah. Oh, awesome.
The one thing though, the airlines, specifically, I remember is like right out of high school, I had a bunch of friends. They just weren't going to go to college, and they all got jobs working on the ramp at United, and that was when it was employee owned. So in a year into their working there, 19-year-olds were making very good, comfortable living wages. Like I knew people starting families at 19, 20, because 19 and 20 years old because of that. And it was when the ESOP, when the employee stock ownership program folded, that's when everyone's wages plummeted. The union, well, actually another thing too is not to get too in the weeds, but the union split because the pilots didn't want to be in the same union as the guys working under the plane. They used a lot of PMC kind of enticing language to get them out of that union into another one. And then, those friends, like some of them went off to college and others just, they could never find another job that paid that well.
Yeah. Like the idea that, who owns the airline and, what, like that these are like that the real question is like whether they have the right values, like the 80 and 90-year-old retired CEOs who Charlie knows so many of. A lot of follow-up questions you can ask about that, by the way, but let's just let's keep going. Like those guys just had good values, whereas these the CEOs of Google and Apple have bad values. It's like, I mean, I would actually. Okay, so one, I mean, the idea that this explains anything about like the supply chain or like any of that other stuff that they're trying to mix up with this is just like monumentally ridiculous. Like, which, I mean, it's actually like really useful, because if you want to try to, like make the case for materialist theory of history, I mean, I think like the best way is to like contrast, like to like just kind of hold this up and like see how absurd it is. To think that like what really matters is what the CEO's values are. But also like, I want to know who, we mentioned GM. How about Ford? Like did Henry Ford have the good, positive, pro-American values?
Well, I mean, during World War II, no. I mean, he liked the other side a little more.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was wondering, right? Like didn't Henry Ford actually accept a medal from Adolf Hitler at one point, like in the 30s?
And then IBM, making their fortune off of literally like labeling our people.
Yeah, right. I mean, actually, right. So if
so maybe Microsoft taking over for IBM is woke. That's why. That's what makes Microsoft woke, is that they're anti-Nazi. I don't know.
I mean, but that is a really good question, right? Because I remember, there was that book that came out. It's like, was it like 15 or 20 years ago, IBM and the Holocaust. It's like that strikes me. I mean, not I'm crazy about either one, but that strikes me as even worse than like having factories in China, where people are paid badly, they have bad conditions. And that was during the era of the good, positive values, pro-American CEOs.
That's right.
But also astronauts from Ohio.
Yep.
And let me test JD's Ohio trivia here.
Okay.
What was the capital of the Northwest Territories? Warren, Ohio.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
I'm actually going to be in Hubbard, Ohio next week.
Okay, that's awesome.
Right near.
I'm going to Warren in a couple weeks, actually.
Yeah. So now you can see, now I know this was the capital.
Oh, that's amazing.
Territories.
Okay.
I learned that from Hugh Hewitt.
Okay.
Who mentions it all the time.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
You're not a Steelers fan, are you?
Right. No, I'm not.
Okay, that's good. So okay, I'm giving you a hard time. I'm going to Ohio next week, actually, for a dear friend of mine who passed away, who is a true Ohioan. I love the Midwest, and anyway, I'm glad to see what you may or may not do. We'll see. So we talked a lot on our program. How do you know who's in charge? Because that's a really important question, because we have been trained from a young age. The people in charge are the people we put in charge.
That's right.
Consent to the governed. And what's happening now, and I think a lot of Americans are waking up to this, is that there's a new class of people that are actually calling the shots. Angelo Codavia has the best piece of literature on this, Ruling Class, and I'm sure you've read it or are aware of it.
Sure.
He writes very frequently for our friend Chris Buzzkirk's website, American Greatness, which is phenomenal. And Victor Davis Hanson writes on there. I learned so much from that website. But JD,
Kenzo, have you ever read anything by Victor Davis Hanson? You know who this guy he's talking about is? Okay.
Who is this?
So he is somebody, I actually didn't know that he wrote for American Greatness, but he did write, maybe still writes for the National Review. And he's basically just like a weird right-wing hysteric, but whose big shtick is that like he has all these is that like he knows a lot about like the Greeks and the Romans. So like, like every time he does a column that's about how, whatever, like, woke liberalism is the same thing as fascism, like he can sprinkle it with, references to, the Battle of, Philippi or whatever,
okay. So it really isn't the 300.
yeah. I mean, but like that's the guy Victor Davis Hanson is, and it's like I've got to say, look, the word grifter is really overused, but I mean, I don't know, man. Like, if you're really impressed by this shtick, like just do better. Expect, it's just, this just seems like something that is like Victor Davis Hanson exists for the sake of making conservatives who want to read like the prose equivalent of what they see on Tucker Carlson feel like sophisticated intellectuals, because there was like a reference to the fall of Rome in it. Like it's just like I don't know. I don't, without saying anything about how self-aware he might or might not be about this, like it just feels like the audience is being sold something that's there's not a lot of vitamins and nutrients in this.
I think, well, I don't know much about who follows Vance, but like Kirk's audience is pretty young, and I think that kind of stuff, they read that and they reference it a little bit and they feel very smart.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that.
You're looking at this double page advertisement in the New York Times.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And this is the ruling class, right? If we're asking who's actually in control of our society and why, no matter who the American people elect, there's very rarely significant seismic political change, even when they ask for it. And you sort of think about all of the institutional pushback against Donald Trump for the 4 years that he was in the White House, which is just crazy, right? Like the constant pressure that he was getting from the corporate folks, from folks in government, from folks in the administrative state. and you start to appreciate what's going on, because like these folks have the real power. And to me, like, power is fundamentally about shaping behavior. And who are you more worried about if you're an American citizen? The people on this page who are standing for democracy, or the people that you elect to the U.S. government?
That's
of
such a good
course,
point.
of course, you care more about these people. These are the people who can prevent you from buying and selling, from owning a home, from working a decent middle class job. This is the ruling class.
Well, and so you just articulated what Machiavelli and Hobbes pointed as: how do you find out who's in charge and who has power? That which can inflict pain.
That's right.
I mean, my local congressman, I don't think he's going to inflict pain on me anytime soon.
Yeah.
He might say something I don't like, but kind of a non-starter. There's a lot of names, companies, organizations that can inflict pain on you. This is the control of the guillotine.
That's right. That's exactly right. And, I was like, I was talking about this with a friend who told me that, her brother-in-law had put something that was pro-Trump on Facebook. And then a few people saw that post and then ganged up on him, got a few other folks involved, called his employer, and tried to get the guy fired. This guy, is a middle-class guy living in southwestern Ohio. Those people and that platform and the guy he works for.
I mean, I agree with him. That guy shouldn't have been fired.
Yeah, I was just going to say, sounds to me like the brother-in-law needed a union.
Have way more power in his life than his local elected officials. And what's really sad about it is that his capacity to push back using our constitutional self-government is incredibly limited so long as these people are in control. And I really do think, I'm not a zero-sum guy. I work in investing in venture capital and technology. I see the world as we're gonna build something that's better for everybody. I'm fundamentally an optimist. But when it comes to the control over our own society, we're in a zero-sum battle with these folks. Either they're going to win or we're going to win, and there's no real middle ground.
So there's a superstructure that's been created outside of anything that is outlined in
the. Wow. Someone opened up the Wikipedia page on Marx and copied and pasted all the bold terms and put it in their notes.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, if we start asking what the relationship is between the base and the superstructure, we're getting somewhere.
In the United States Constitution.
Yep.
And we know it. We call it the ruling class, but to be more specific, it's the people that signed this. And if you're on radio, you say, what are you talking about? This is a double-page ad in the New York Times.
Yep.
Where it says, we stand for democracy, and all these ridiculous platitudes and statements signed by, what do you say, JD? 300 names on here? 400 names?
It's a lot of names, yeah.
Just kind of eyeballing it. Of every type of group, right? There's lawyers, law firms, celebrities, nonprofit organizations, individuals, corporations. Basically, they are flexing their muscle.
That's right.
They are saying, if you keep doing this, the beatings will continue until morale improves.
That's right. Well, and think about this. If you're a Georgia legislator, the Georgia governor, any politician in these societies, if you don't do what these people want you to do, they can inflict pain on your people.
Power. That's
power.
That is how you define power.
That's, if you're a legislator, the governor of Ohio once told me the business of the governor is business, meaning the job of the governor is jobs. Like, my job is
Governor
to make it possible.
Said that?
Yeah.
That's a strange thing to say.
But the idea is you need to bring good jobs into your own society. That's the thing that you do. If these people are threatening you, then you're going to bow down before them, because they have the power to decide whether your citizens are in destitution or have a middle-class lifestyle. Of course, these people are in charge. And I think about this. One of the big problems that we have in American society, just generation after generation, is the expanding power of the administrative state. And if it means anything to be in control of the executive, I would think that it means you can fire the people who work for you, right? I was elected president. If you're Donald Trump, if you're Charlie Kirk, elected president tomorrow, and you can't fire the people that work for you, then you're not actually in control of your own government, because those are the people who carry out the policies. And I see these law firms, and I guarantee some of these firms were involved in the various court decisions that took power away from the president to fire people in the executive. So it's all just this constant cycle of shifting power away from people, from their constitutional self-government to our new corporate oligarchy. And again, like, we've just got to call it out. We've got to stop it.
And the way it needs to be articulated is we have this albatross leviathan of a federal government and then a corporate government.
Yep.
And one of those you sort of vote for. One of those you can sue in the courts. You at least have some taxpayer rights.
Right.
Sort of.
Right.
And as Tucker, famously said, look, they take Arbor Day off in the government. They're not exactly in a hurry to invoke massive social change. Right.
That's right.
I mean that as a compliment. I don't know if it's a compliment. They're just slow moving, right?
That's right.
And they have a lot of power, but we've been trained in the conservative movement to say that's the only threat of power we should care about.
Correct.
That's the only threat of power. The only threat of power is a federal regulator knocking on your door. By the way, that's a very legitimate thing.
Of course it is.
And you're seeing unfair sentencing towards people that are doing one thing and BLM people go fair. I'm all for that. And I haven't lost my enthusiasm for that.
Of course.
What I think we're all trying to say, though, is, well, you have to have a much more broader and more comprehensive view of who's actually in charge. And what if I told you that these people are actually a hierarchy above the fourth branch of government?
Yep.
Talk about how these people are actually calling the shots above the FDA, above the IRS, above the SEC, that the celebrities, the corporations, the sports stars, the nonprofit organizations, and the lawyers and the academics and the colleges, they actually have muscle over our government.
That's exactly right. Yeah, so this happens in a couple of different ways. It happens through cultural power directly, and then it happens through government power indirectly, because, of course, when Google, Twitter, Facebook, when they censor private citizens, they're very often doing it at the whim of these leaders, right? It's not like Donald Trump or Joe Biden is telling Google or Twitter to censor people. They're doing it out of their own accord. And even when the government does get involved, like Dick Blumenthal, the senator from Connecticut, is constantly telling people that you need to censor folks. Well, Twitter can ignore that or not ignore it. That's ultimately in control of the Twitter sort of corporate hierarchy. And so this concentrated power does have a remarkable effect on how people live their lives. The other piece of this is it also affects like what you're allowed to say. So just to give you an example, very personal to you. When I went on your show a few weeks ago, we had a great conversation. Somebody said, "Why did you go on his show? He's a white supremacist," which I actually never heard about you. And I've been called a white supremacist in the Washington Post. When that happened to me, I lost investors over that. I lost friends over that. No.
The Washington Post.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I'm saying the accusation levied against you, it's been levied against me. You lose commercial benefits. You lose your ability to earn a living.
Yes.
You lose friends over it. Who's levying those accusations? That's not like primarily a government thing. That's these corporations who use that accusation to silence people who criticize them. Our mutual friend Tucker Carlson, why do they try so hard to destroy him? Because they know he's actually a threat to their power. And so every time they start a boycott campaign against him, every time they try to call him something that he isn't, what they're doing is they're flexing their muscles and saying, you need to shut up and sit down. Mercifully, he hasn't done that yet. But this is really what it's about, is controlling what you think, what you say, where you live, what you can do for a living. That's power, and it exists in our corporate class in a much more significant way than it has in American history, I think.
And it seems like it's intensified. And where I get really angry, and I'm pound the table angry, and I just had a Republican congressman here a couple of days ago, and he just like failure to compute, right? And he's like, oh, well, the corporations will come around. I say, you really don't understand what's happening right now, do you? They are on team left or team totalitarian, whatever you want to call it. And you guys cut their corporate taxes. You've defended their oligarchy because you thought deep down they'll contribute to your political campaigns. Guess what? They're not doing that anymore.
That's exactly right.
And so you gave them every handout in the books. Meanwhile, they pillaged our middle class. They deindustrialized our economy. They sent pink slips to millions of blue-collar workers in Ohio, Indiana, and Wisconsin saying, no, we're going to go take a Gulfstream to Wuhan so we can go make, T-shirts for less and go bring in a bunch of plastic that our country doesn't need so that I can go get points on the deal at McKinsey so I can go buy a third yacht in the Bahamas.
Meanwhile, I think that's like the third Wuhan reference.
Chaos. And what did our Republicans do? Like, oh, we must defend it for free trade purposes. Like, I'm not going to take that anymore.
No,
that's
must do
insane.
well in the algorithm.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And again, what these corporations are doing, I think, is violating a sacred obligation that citizens of this country have.
Yes.
We all benefit from this in incredible ways. Like, you've had an amazing life. I've had an amazing life. I came from nothing. I've got a beautiful wife. I've got 2 kids who I love to death. I've got a cool job. That sense that this country has given you something should come along with a sense that you owe the country something. You owe an obligation, a debt to the people who made this country great.
Well, and and we're up against a break here.
Please.
And I just hold on to that thought, because there's this conflation of this rugged individualism of that I no longer have any loyalty to that which is around me, which I think is so destructive.
Absolutely.
In every way. So you guys have heard me talk about release.
Yep. All right. So they hit the break. Now he's gonna read some ads for some non-woke capital. But I guess I mean, I think the cognitive dissonance here is just amazing. And for anybody who is watching this, and they're less they've been making better life choices than I have, so this is the only Charlie Kirk they've seen. Or the only Charlie Kirk they've seen in a while, and they don't have the larger context for why this is so strange. In Charlie Kirk's debate with Kyle Kulinski at Politicon a couple of years ago, Kulinski actually asked him, "Okay, I want to test this. Would you be okay with raising Jeff Bezos' taxes by like 1% so we could provide housing to every single homeless veteran?" Mm-hmm. And Charlie's response was, "Well, I would hope he would do it voluntarily."
That is liberty.
Yeah, that's the good non-French kind of liberty. But yeah.
One thing that's sticking with me, he said earlier, and I was kind of hoping maybe he'd explain a little more, Kirk, was, he said that like a corporation can inflict pain on him, but a congressperson could. But he doesn't have that connection between how these corporations push policies through his congressman. And so I'm just trying to see how he connects the dots. He doesn't seem to do it at all.
Well, and it's weird because there was sort of a gesture in that direction. I guess this was JD, but with the thing about how, well, you were hoping that ultimately these corporations, would be on your side and they contribute to your campaign. But it's like, okay, so keep going with that thought, right? Like, in fact, there was even a point earlier in the conversation where they said, well, they could like act like blackmail, state government into doing what they want, by threatening capital flight. Like they didn't put it exactly those words, but it seemed like that was what they were talking about. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, so you are aware of these mechanisms. And it's just like, okay, like, how is it that I don't understand how you can say all the things that Charlie Kirk has been saying for the last few minutes about how actually the corporation has more ability to inflict pain on you than your congressman. Mm-hmm. And, all this different kinds of power they have over you because they can fire you and they can take, business elsewhere. And, and we're really like, this is a form of power that's just like government power. It's like, how can you say all of that and then still be like, well, I mean, obviously we can't take 1% of Jeff Bezos' money. I mean, that would be a violation of the sacred rights of property, sir. It just like the dissonance between those two things is just amazing. That when they're thinking about wokeness, then like they'll spend 10 minutes saying things that that leftists say all the time. God, I remember reading like Noam Chomsky forever ago talking about how the internal structure of corporations is totalitarian. But okay, so given that, then like shouldn't taking away some of these people's wealth and giving it to everybody else, like, which would reduce this horrible tyrannical power that they agree that they have over us, like, would that be good?
Mm-hmm. You'd think.
Like, yeah, this is so weird. It's like they're like 95% of the way to like an argument for democratic socialism, but then then it's like, and in conclusion, Google should be less woke.
Mm-hmm.
Our show sent you relieffactor.com, give it a shot. Charlie Kirk here on the Charlie Kirk Show. Next segment, we're going to keep on diving into that. We're also going to talk about a New York story for our friends on WABC on our inaugural week. Email us your thoughts, freedom@charliekirk.com. Subscribe to our podcast. So much more we're going to get to. Stay right there. Zion, Andrew Yang seems to be gaining some ground, and we will be doing a segment on that. And I want to say hello again to our friends at WABC. I will say this about Andrew Yang, and actually segues to our topic in the second hour, but I do want to finish what we talked about in the previous segment. Andrew Yang played a very important role in the Democrat Party, which is he, more than anyone else, moved the Overton window on universal basic income. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that, JD?
Absolutely.
He's running for the mayor of New York. And he's known as the guy that wants to give people UBI. By the way, not a completely terrible idea if crafted correctly. We're currently not crafting it correctly. But that's an example of what I think Republicans and conservatives need to do. We're going to talk about that in the second hour. But I want to complete the point here, JD, that you talked about, of this idea of some sort of loyalty to that which is around you, the sacrifice that was made before you.
Yep.
That you are not the first person to grace the terrain of this country.
Right.
That there is a system that was built by people for a reason so you can succeed. I live a nice life. You live a nice life. The motivation I have and that you have is actually less about trying to just maximize the amount of short-term pleasure. And actually, it's instead of kind of just trying to save the promise in the experiment of America.
Yep. That's exactly right. I think a fundamental conservative principle is that people benefit from and like to be rooted. They like to be rooted in their values, in their faith, in their communities. And, if I could just sort of segue just a little bit to the way in which the left is attacking American history, right? Why is this such a big problem? Like, I think you and I react viscerally to it, right? I've been trying to think to myself, why am I so mad that the left is attacking American history? And it sort of dawned on me. My grandmother was not an educated woman. She did not even complete high school. Mama. But she knew the battles that General Patton had won in North Africa.
I mean, this is almost redundant, but how's the left attacking American history? Like really, like how, like what does that mean actually to attack American history? Like,
I don't know. I mean, I guess the message they're trying to get across is that people are trying to rewrite history through woke lens, but the actual term attacking history means nothing.
Yeah, that's so weird because it's like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, history's like just there, like it doesn't matter what you do. Like, it's like if taken literally, yeah, history can't be attacked. But like, does that mean like saying inaccurate things about American history? Does it mean like
taking down Confederate monuments? Maybe.
I think taking down Confederate monuments is really what it means, because like it sounds like they're talking about like trying to stop people from learning about American history, but clearly not, right? Like these, I mean, the left and whatever, they use that term, to mean like everybody but them, but the left by which they mean, I don't know, Chuck Schumer and everybody to his left, wants to, like certainly does not want anybody to stop learning American history. Like at worst, you could say that, the left, if we're going to use this language game here, wants to teach people about things that actually did happen, but that, that make Charlie and JD uncomfortable. And, to be fair, sure, maybe in some instances, promote things that, that are somewhat inaccurate. Certainly, like there are plenty of legitimate, criticisms of like the 1619 Project, for example, but like more inaccurate than the version of American history that Charlie Kirk would like. Yeah, I have a hard time believing that.
By heart. I mean, she was like a military historian when it came to World War II. In that sense that she had been part of accomplishing something in World War II. America's not just abstractions, right? It's a people that went and did great things. That was passed on to me. Even though, of course, I did nothing to help in World War II, I felt a certain pride, a certain sense of place and obligation that came from that. And I want to pass that on to my son, right? The thing that connects us as Americans, my grandmother to my son, they never met because my grandmother passed 15 years ago, is that sense of a shared common national purpose. And what these corporations are doing and what our ruling class is doing is it's destroying that sense of national purpose. It's delinking us from our past and from our future.
And this is why I double and triple down, because our history is actually beautiful.
Yes.
It's for example, the Northwest Territories, of which Ohio was included, was the first sovereign land that went out of its way to explicitly ban slavery, ratified by the U.S. Congress as its first act of Congress.
Yep.
So how can anyone say we were founded on slavery?
Yeah.
So,
Toto Kaka asked, was he alive during World War II? No, he sure was not. JD Vance is 4 years younger than I am. But it's kind of amazing, actually, the way he did that little aside. It's like, well, it's not like I did anything in World War II. Because, like, it's so close to him just doing that Doug Stanhope bit where Stanhope's like, nationalism makes people stupid and, like, take pride in things they had nothing to do with. And his Stanhope's example, like in the set, is people talk about, it's like, France complains about us, but we saved them during World War II. And, he's like, yeah, we saved them? Really? We saved France, right? Maybe I was just drinking and blacked out. I think I would have remembered saving France, And
it was like that one moment of clarity for Obama where he was like, you didn't build that. And he got roasted for that. But it was one of the best things he said in 8 years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What Obama was expressing, there's an even truer version if you didn't build that, which is like people who worked for you did. But, that's not what he meant. But like what he was expressing was like a really ground level kind of super basic sort of, liberal social contract point that like back in the 1950s in that era, they were talking about nobody really would have blinked at, which is, that like it's impossible to build up a business and without like the living in a society and having the infrastructure that exists for that, and that you owe your existence as a business to that, and so it's reasonable that you put some of it back in. Like none of this is remotely radical stuff. Like it's like this is something that I think actually even a lot of Republicans, if they were like calmed down and were honest about it, would be like, yeah, I guess like but yeah, but it just but they all went nuts about that, because it's like, oh, he's saying that that you're not that you didn't personally will that boat dealership into existence, like just with the power of your thoughts, like like Athena popping out of the head of Zeus, like it's like, yeah, you did it. That's a completely reasonable thing to say, and anybody who's not like a hardcore anarcho-capitalist who seriously believes that you could have a functioning market economy without a state. Like anybody but that should agree with that. Yeah, actually, that's a good question. Let me just look this up. Somebody raised this in the chat. Yeah. Hold on. Let me just look this up, make sure I'm not saying anything wrong. So, yeah. Seems like, yeah, that claim that he made about the Northwest Territory abolishing slavery, do we have an idea of like what year he'd be talking about?
I don't know.
Yeah. Because as somebody points out in the chat, like England abolished slavery in 1807. So like, did they beat them to that? Yeah, yeah, we will, well, actually, I should say, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, I think actually that was when Britain abolished the slave trade throughout the British Empire. I think it was actually abolished within the borders of Great Britain before that. But yeah, he made a big deal about this in what were we watching the other night? No, it was in the debate with Vosh. He made a big deal about like all of these places that had never had like probably like more than like 20 slaves had never lived in, that abolished slavery super early in American history. Like, he made a big thing about how Vermont, abolished slavery in like 1777. It's like, yeah, okay. And like, that's great for the 5 slaves who lived in Vermont. I mean, assuming there were even 5 slaves who lived in Vermont. But you do notice that in all the parts of America where it was actually integral to the economy, not only did that not happen in 1777, but like one of the bloodiest wars in the history of the world had to be fought to end it because they were that reluctant to let go of it.
It's astounding.
Yeah, I just like, yeah, it's just fucking stupid. I mean, it's like, there's no way that you could seriously believe. I mean, it's one thing to say like lots of people in the American Revolution were anti-slavery. There was lots of anti-slavery sentiment already. That's completely true. But like, if we're talking about the country as a whole, it's like, I don't know. I mean, first couple presidents were slaveholders. There's the Constitution, spelled out the exact formula for how to count slaves, towards in comparison to real people, towards like apportioning out, electoral districts. It kind of seems like the economy as a whole still had a lot to do with slavery. And it's, I mean, when he says America wasn't founded on slavery, it's like, well, I guess I don't know what that means, that America was or wasn't founded on slavery. But
it sounds like some lost cause messaging. Like they're really on that about how like the war wasn't about slavery, that, the Confederate flag wasn't about upholding slavery and all that. And I think they're kind of sneaking that in there.
Yeah. Cause like, if what you mean is it wasn't founded on slavery, is like, okay, there is like a view, like the Hannah Nicole Jones thing, that like preserving slavery was the point of the American Revolution. And, yeah, that's not true. Right? There's very little evidence for that. Fair enough. But like, would the American economy have been, at all imaginable as a whole in 1776 without slavery? No.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, this, and it just, I don't know, seems to me that if you're going to accuse people of attacking history, like, and then like you just can't bring yourself to be real about a historical fact as basic as when America was founded, it was a slave society. I mean, 1 in 6 Americans at the time of the founding were slaves. That,
significant.
That's pretty significant, right? I mean, that's a lot of, especially considering that there were all these northern states with hardly that, abolished slavery. As he likes to point out, right, that these northern states, had passed laws against slavery already. So that means that, like, in the few states that had slavery at the time of the founding, that was, that's a hell of a lot more than 1 in 6 people. Like those are states where the economy is all about slavery, and so it's like, yeah, I mean, a big part of what the American state was doing for the first several decades after it was founded was propping up the institution of slavery. I mean, that just seems like, I mean, that's just a historical fact. And I mean, if what he means by attacking history is that, we don't have statues of people that he'd like us to have statues to, I mean, whatever. I mean, it's a pretty, like, cliched kind of normie kind of point, but like, I'm pretty sure that nobody in Germany or Austria has forgotten that World War II happened, because there aren't, like, Hermann Göring statues in the public square. Like I think you can continue to be aware of all of that stuff without being reminded by statues.
I mean, like, what, what's written into the law in Germany is that you can't have things like that, and that is a pretty much a way of remembering that history.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it just that's such a weird, like, we don't have like, yeah, the American Revolution that all these guys are obsessed with. Like, we have somehow managed to remember that it happened, just despite the absence of King George statues. Like, that's such a, but I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess, like, we're about the time we were going to break off. So what I got out of this is, like, the biggest thing that hit me about the, like, 3 segments or whatever, between breaks or whatever we just watched, is just how vacuous it was.
Yeah.
That, they spent, like, there was a lot of talk about how they dislike the values of like corporate CEOs, and there was some incredibly vague talk about the left attacking history, but the closest that they came to actually endorsing any specific policy to solve any of the problems they were talking about was Charlie saying, well, UBI would be okay if it was properly crafted, whatever the hell that means.
Yeah, I mean, the UBI is pretty basic. It's you get a flat sum of money. So I don't know how properly crafted he means. Like, people then have to, like, work for it, and then it's not UBI.
Yeah, I would be, I guess, I don't know, but I feel like 85% certain that what he means by properly crafted, if JD had asked him, would have been some combination of, like, work requirements or means testing, or you I don't know, like, you only you only have it if you if like your kids get good grades and you all go to church, or something like that, right? There's going to be whatever it is that would make it properly crafted for the purposes of Charlie Kirk. It would be something that would make it no longer you.
Yeah.
All right. Any final thoughts before we sign off?
Well, I my heart goes out to you debating him, not because he's smart and he's going to be a challenge, but because, like you said, he's all over the place. He's vacuous. It's going to be kind of hard to latch on to an argument. So good luck. I hope you have fun with it.
Well, I appreciate that. Whatever else happens, I'm fairly sure that it will be fun. So remember, Kenzo Shibata is a teacher, union activist, the host of Meet the Left and the Kenzo Shibata Show. Anything coming up you want to plug?
Let's see. There's that episode coming up October 10th. October 3rd with Catherine Liu, Pascal Robert, and David Sirota.
Nice.
We're going to talk about the week's news and definitely going to focus on Haiti because Pascal knows more than I think any of the leftists that are out there making media. So I'm really happy to have him on to talk about it.
Wow. Yeah, that is a killer lineup. That should be really, really good. All right. Thanks, Pascal. Thanks everybody for watching. Left is best.
All right. Take care, Ben.